Dark clouds are gathering over Keir Starmer's leadership, and this time they may not pass. In a searing warning just issued, Douglas Murray has pulled no punches, declaring that the dark days for Starmer are not on the horizon. They are already here. With Labour in turmoil, immigration chaos on the rise, and Starmer's credibility crumbling under the weight of contradiction and indecision, the illusion of control is vanishing fast. The question isn't whether Starmer can survive, but whether there's anything left for him to salvage. What Murray reveals is not just a critique, it's a signal that Starmer's political foundations are beginning to collapse, and Britain is watching every moment of the fall. Douglas Murray's latest remarks are more than just political commentary. They are a chilling assessment of a party teetering on the edge. He describes Keir Starmer's leadership as hollow, visionless, and rapidly deteriorating. The phrase dark days is not an exaggeration, it is a verdict. According to Murray, Starmer's attempts to please everyone have left him respected by no one. His policies shift like sand, his messaging is confused, and his presence, cold and distant. What once seemed like a cautious and calculating leadership now appears weak, uncertain, and reactionary. The warning comes as Labour faces a storm of crises that strike at the core of its promises. Immigration numbers have surged dramatically, despite Starmer's pledges to smash the gangs and secure Britain's borders. Over 5,500 migrants have crossed the Channel illegally since Labour took office just 6 weeks ago. Murray is scathing. How can a government that claims to be tough on crime allow this to continue with such impunity? How can Starmer, who scrapped the Rwanda deportation plan, calling it a gimmick, defend a border strategy that has yet to materialise? These are not rhetorical questions. They are demands for accountability, and the answers remain invisible. Murray argues that Starmer's decisions are not just failures, they are symptoms of deeper political cowardice. Rather than make hard choices or draw firm lines, Starmer floats between positions, hoping to avoid conflict. But the public isn't fooled. On immigration, on Brexit, on law and order, his indecision reads as indifference. And the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Border Force vessels are now routinely pulling hundreds of people from the Channel in a single day. Local communities are overwhelmed, and public trust is vanishing. This isn't a slow decline, it's a free fall. Behind closed doors, Starmer faces growing unrest within Labour itself. The very MPs who once backed his rise are beginning to whisper, question, and doubt. Many feel sidelined by his centralised grip on the party. Critics within his own ranks claim he silences dissent rather than debates it, curating a sterile, scripted version of Labour that's disconnected from real people. The promise of a broad church has become a one-man show, and it's not playing well with voters or with colleagues. Murray's message cuts deep because it reflects a broader truth. Keir Starmer is no longer leading the narrative, he's reacting to it. Each headline, each migrant boat, each awkward interview chips away at the fragile image of competence he tried to build. His legal background gives him a methodical, cautious demeanour, but in politics, hesitation often looks like weakness. And right now, Britain is not in the mood for hesitation. The media, once cautiously optimistic about Starmer's potential, is turning sceptical. Even outlets that lean left are beginning to publish stories questioning his clarity, his charisma, and his conviction. Public opinion polls are slipping, voters are uneasy, and within the Tory ranks, whispers are turning into cheers. They believe Starmer's unravelling will hand them a lifeline. It's no longer about policy wins, it's about political survival. As Murray warns, these aren't just dark days. For Starmer personally, they're dark days for the Labour Party's future. The public may have voted for change, but what they see now is chaos wrapped in careful language. The next sections will reveal just how deep this crisis runs, from internal revolt to public outrage, and the looming fear that Starmer may not just lose the next election. He may lose control altogether. Beneath the surface of Keir Starmer's tightly controlled leadership lies a political machine slowly grinding to a halt. While the public headlines focus on immigration crises and public disillusionment, a quieter, more dangerous threat is emerging from within: Labour's internal collapse. The signs are not just whispers in Parliament's corridors, they are full-blown fractures forming among Labour MPs, shadow ministers and grassroots members who once rallied behind Starmer with hope, only to find themselves sidelined, silenced, or simply fed up. The dark days Douglas Murray warned of are not only visible in policy failure, but in the moral and structural unravelling of Starmer's grip on his party. The first warning signs came during the local elections, where Labour expected strong gains across key battlegrounds. Instead, results fell flat in several heartland areas, exposing a dangerous disconnect between Starmer's London-based leadership and the working-class communities Labour once dominated. Councillors and activists on the ground reported apathy, confusion, and in some areas outright hostility towards Labour's message, or rather the lack of one. "We don't know what we're fighting for anymore," one local organiser admitted. The problem wasn't the candidates, it was Starmer's vacuum of vision, leaving them defending a party that no longer seemed to believe in anything concrete. This electoral disappointment has only deepened existing divisions. Starmer's inner circle, obsessed with control and message discipline, has pushed many in the party to breaking point. Shadow ministers complain privately of being gagged, with all major statements vetted by a tight-knit communications team more interested in optics than substance. MPs with decades of experience now find themselves overridden by unelected advisers. Policies are floated, dropped, reworded or ignored based on polling panic, not principle. This kind of centralisation, Murray argues, is not leadership. It is fear masquerading as strategy, and it is driving the party toward an identity crisis that could prove fatal. One particularly explosive source of tension is Starmer's handling of cultural issues and internal discipline. His aggressive purging of certain MPs and activists, often justified under the banner of rooting out anti-Semitism or extremism, has created a climate of paranoia and distrust. While the need for party discipline is undeniable, critics argue that Starmer's methods have been blunt and politically motivated. Some accuse him of using ethics as a shield to eliminate political rivals and consolidate power. The result? A fractured membership, where one faction sees Starmer as a necessary reformer, while another views him as a ruthless autocrat silencing the soul of the party. The ideological war within Labour has also reignited tensions between the old Blairite centrists and the Corbynite left. Starmer, once seen as a unifier, now stands accused of betraying both camps. The centrists lament his lack of vision, comparing his cold, managerial style unfavourably to Blair's energetic leadership. Meanwhile, the left claims Starmer rode into power on their support, only to abandon their policies and purge their influence the moment he secured the top job. This dual betrayal has left him stranded, a leader without a loyal base, no longer the compromise candidate, but the common enemy of every discontented faction. Adding to the internal chaos is Starmer's inconsistent approach to the economy. As inflation bites and households struggle with soaring costs, Labour's economic messaging remains vague and toothless. Promises of fiscal responsibility ring hollow when they are not backed by bold, concrete proposals. Meanwhile, the media, once Starmer's reluctant ally, has begun circling. Headlines that once praised his grown-up politics now question whether his caution is cowardice. Pundits describe him as a ghostly presence in British politics, always there, yet never truly saying anything. Even mainstream broadcasters, usually reserved in their criticism, now point to his repeated dodging of key issues in interviews, his robotic delivery, and his glaring lack of emotional resonance with ordinary voters. These are not superficial flaws. They cut to the heart of Starmer's political weakness. A leader who cannot inspire his party cannot win a nation, and then comes the most damning development of all, rumblings of a leadership challenge. While no MP has publicly declared their intention to replace Starmer, behind the scenes, names are circulating. Whispers of potential successors, figures who might recapture the working-class vote or re-energise the base, are growing louder. Allies insist Starmer is safe, but the mood in Westminster tells a different story. Backbenchers grumble, Shadow cabinet members hedge their words, and party staffers confess off-record that morale is crumbling. It's not a matter of if Starmer will be challenged, but when, and by whom. The great irony of Starmer's downfall, as Murray observes, is that it stems not from scandal or extremism, but from absence. An absence of clarity, of courage, of connection. In trying to be everything to everyone, Starmer has become nothing to anyone. The Labour Party, desperate for leadership, finds itself adrift once more, fragmented, fatigued, and facing a general election with a captain who no longer commands the confidence of his crew. And while the Conservatives may be in disarray, the tragedy for Labour is that they are no longer the default alternative. Reform UK is rising in the polls, appealing to disillusioned voters across the country. Nigel Farage and others now frame the national debate, while Starmer struggles to get a word in. The vacuum he created is being filled, not by Labour voices, but by rivals who aren't afraid to speak plainly, even if controversially. The next section will explore how this growing public disillusionment is translating into real political danger, how Starmer's inability to inspire, combined with a chaotic border crisis and economic drift, is setting the stage for an electoral collapse that may not be stoppable. The storm isn't coming. It's already here. As internal divisions tear at the Labour Party's core, an even more visible and immediate threat confronts Keir Starmer, public outrage over the spiralling border crisis that has become synonymous with his leadership. Since taking office 6 weeks ago, Starmer's government has faced an unprecedented surge in illegal channel crossings, with more than 5,500 migrants making perilous journeys to British shores. This surge has not only strained resources and infrastructure, but has deeply shaken public confidence in the government's ability to maintain law and order. The border crisis has evolved from a political talking point into a national emergency, a symbol of perceived government incompetence that opponents and disillusioned voters alike seize upon as evidence of Starmer's failing leadership. The crisis is stark and undeniable. Despite promises to smash the gangs behind human trafficking, the sheer number of migrants crossing the Channel has soared, especially with weather conditions improving in recent weeks. On a single day recently, at least 9 small boats, carrying more than 450 migrants entered UK waters, pushing the yearly total past 19,000 and highlighting the government's struggle to contain the situation. The abandonment of the Rwanda deportation scheme, a policy designed to deter crossings by processing asylum seekers offshore, has become a focal point for criticism. Starmer and his team branded the scheme a gimmick on their very first day in power, opting instead to focus on targeting people smugglers, a strategy that remains underdeveloped and slow to produce results. The absence of a senior officer to lead the new Border Security Command further underscores the administration's lack of preparedness and urgency. Public frustration with the government's handling of immigration is palpable and widespread. Coastal communities, overwhelmed by the constant arrival of migrants, have expressed feelings of neglect and desperation. Local officials warn that emergency services are stretched thin, and resources once devoted to community development are being redirected to border security. This has fueled a narrative of government failure that resonates far beyond the immediate areas affected. National polls reveal that immigration ranks as one of the top concerns for voters, with many blaming Starmer's Labour for the situation's deterioration. Opponents have seized on these fears, painting Labour as weak on law and order and unable to protect Britain's borders. The media plays a crucial role in amplifying this crisis, often highlighting dramatic rescues and the grim realities of channel crossings. Headlines emphasise both the human tragedy and the political fallout, creating a potent mix of sympathy and anger that the government struggles to manage. Douglas Murray's scathing commentary encapsulates this sentiment. He accuses Starmer of weak leadership and inconsistent messaging, suggesting that voters are left confused and distrustful. Murray points out that the government's failure to enforce its own policies equally across society exacerbates social divisions, deepening the sense that justice is applied unevenly and that borders are porous to those who should be kept out. This border crisis does not exist in isolation. It feeds into broader public concerns about national security, economic stability, and social cohesion. Inflation and the rising cost of living already strain many households, and the added pressure of immigration is exploited by political rivals to stoke fear and resentment. Starmer's cautious, legalistic approach to governance, once seen as a strength, now appears detached and inadequate in the face of such urgent challenges. The government's reluctance to take bold, decisive action alienates voters seeking reassurance and clear leadership. Compounding these problems is the stark contrast with conservative rhetoric, which capitalises on the crisis by promising tougher border controls and harsher penalties for traffickers. Though the Tory party is itself struggling with internal problems, it skillfully uses the immigration issue to rally its base and undermine Labour's credibility. Starmer's failure to articulate a compelling, coherent immigration strategy leaves Labour vulnerable to attacks and contributes to a growing perception that the party is out of touch with everyday concerns. Moreover, the border crisis has broader electoral implications. It threatens to alienate traditional Labour voters in working-class areas who prioritise border security and law enforcement, but find themselves caught between Starmer's progressive rhetoric and the harsh realities of illegal crossings. This demographic shift risks eroding Labour's base at a critical moment, potentially handing key seats to rivals like the Conservatives or emerging parties such as Reform UK, which appeal directly to voter anxieties on immigration and national identity. The government's missteps have also emboldened critics who argue that Starmer's leadership style, marked by excessive caution and over-centralisation, is ill-suited to managing crises that require swift and decisive action. Starmer's reluctance to fully embrace the tough policies needed to control borders or to effectively communicate a clear plan has created a vacuum of leadership that political opponents are eager to fill. Public trust is waning, and the longer the crisis persists without visible improvement, the more difficult it will be for Labour to regain credibility. Finally, the border crisis symbolises the broader challenges facing Starmer's leadership. It highlights the gap between promise and performance, rhetoric and reality, control and chaos. For many voters, the Channel crossings are not just about immigration. They represent inflation continues to bite hard, living costs soar, and everyday Britons are increasingly burdened by uncertainty and hardship. Yet, in this pivotal moment, Starmer's economic messaging remains vague, cautious, and to many observers, insufficient. While the public looks for a clear alternative to Conservative mishandling, Labour's failure to present a compelling and coherent economic strategy risks alienating the very voters it must win to reclaim power. The economic landscape Starmer inherited is undeniably complex. Rising inflation, energy price shocks, and a global slowdown have combined to create a perfect storm. Families face record grocery bills, heating their homes comes at a premium, and the spectre of recession looms. Against this backdrop, voters crave leadership that offers both hope and practical solutions. Yet Starmer's approach appears mired in caution and ambiguity. His repeated calls for fiscal responsibility sound more like a rehearsed slogan than a plan. Labour's promises to tackle inequality and create jobs are often overshadowed by a reluctance to commit to ambitious policies that might unsettle financial markets or alienate centrist voters. Critics inside and outside the party argue that Starmer's economic caution stems from fear of being labelled as the party of reckless spending or tax hikes, labels that Conservative opponents wield aggressively. This risk aversion has led to a series of half measures and deferred decisions. For example, Starmer's reluctance to clearly outline plans for investment in green energy, infrastructure, or industrial strategy leaves Labour appearing reactive rather than visionary. The result is a policy vacuum at a time when bold ideas are desperately needed. Labour's economic silence contrasts sharply with the vivid and at times chaotic Tory economic narrative. While the Conservatives stumble with contradictory policies and leadership turmoil, they continue to project an image of control and decisiveness on the economy, however flawed it might be. Starmer, by contrast, has failed to capitalise on Tory weaknesses. His muted tone and lack of emotional connection with voters make it difficult for Labour to inspire confidence that it can manage the economy better. Polling data reflects this. Economic competence remains one of the top areas where Labour struggles to convince the electorate, a dangerous gap that undermines Starmer's broader political standing. Within Labour ranks, this economic uncertainty fuels further dissatisfaction. Shadow cabinet members press for clearer policy outlines and more aggressive proposals to tackle inflation, support working families, and stimulate growth. Yet their calls often fall on deaf ears or are diluted by cautious communications teams, fearful of provoking Tory attacks. This dynamic feeds the broader narrative of Starmer's leadership as overly centralised and overly cautious, a leader unwilling to take the risks necessary to reinvigorate Labour's electoral fortunes. The economic challenges are compounded by public perceptions of Labour's stance on taxation. While many voters understand the need for increased revenue to fund public services and address inequality, there is significant concern over how and where taxes will rise. Starmer's reluctance to explicitly discuss potential tax reforms, or to clearly distinguish Labour's approach from that of the Conservatives, leaves a vacuum quickly filled by Tory scare campaigns. This uncertainty further erodes trust among middle-income voters who remain sceptical of Labour's promises, but also wary of Conservative mismanagement. The shadow of Brexit also looms large over the economic conversation. Starmer's shifting position on Brexit has created confusion about Labour's trade policies and relationship with the European Union. Businesses, especially in key sectors like manufacturing and finance, seek clarity and stability, something Starmer has yet to convincingly provide. The resulting uncertainty weighs heavily on investor confidence and the UK's economic prospects, making Starmer's economic stewardship appear indecisive and unfocused. Compounding these economic woes is the media's relentless focus on the gap between Labour's rhetoric and delivery. Journalists and commentators highlight Starmer's cautious speeches and lack of a compelling narrative on economic renewal, contrasting it with the bold, if sometimes reckless, promises of rivals. This coverage shapes public opinion, reinforcing the perception that Starmer lacks the vision and dynamism needed to steer the UK through its economic challenges. Moreover, the broader global context intensifies the challenge. With inflationary pressures expected to persist and global markets remaining volatile, the need for clear and credible economic leadership is greater than ever. Starmer's failure to rise to this moment risks allowing not only the Conservatives, but also emerging parties like Reform UK to capitalise on economic discontent. These parties offer simple, often populist solutions that, while lacking in substance, resonate with voters desperate for change and answers. Ultimately, the economic struggle represents a crucible for Starmer's leadership. His ability to articulate a clear, confident and forward-looking economic agenda will be pivotal in shaping Labour's electoral prospects. Without it, the party risks being trapped in a cycle of cautious politicking, failing to excite voters, or convincingly challenge Conservative dominance on the economy. The stakes could not be higher. As families tighten their belts and anxieties grow, the question remains: can Starmer break free from his policy vacuum before it's too late? Or will economic inertia drag Labour deeper into political obscurity? The mounting crises, border chaos, economic uncertainty, and internal party strife have brought Keir Starmer's leadership to a critical crossroads. If Labour is to have any hope of reversing its decline and mounting a serious challenge to the Conservatives, urgent and decisive action is needed. Starmer must abandon his cautious, overly legalistic approach and adopt a leadership style that is bold, clear, and emotionally resonant. The public demands not just promises, but tangible solutions delivered with conviction and urgency. First and foremost, Starmer must restore faith in his party's ability to govern by taking control of the immigration crisis. This means developing and communicating a coherent border strategy that balances compassion with firm enforcement, reassuring voters that the UK's borders are secure without turning away those in genuine need. Reinstating or reforming deterrent policies like the Rwanda scheme or implementing new effective alternatives is essential. Starmer's government cannot afford to let boat crossings become a symbol of weakness and disorder. On the economic front, Labour must articulate a clear and ambitious vision for growth and fairness. Vague pledges will no longer suffice. Starmer needs to present concrete plans addressing inflation, job creation, and investment in future industries like green energy and technology. This agenda must inspire confidence among voters worried about their livelihoods while countering Tory scare tactics with transparent, pragmatic policies. The party's economic message should be both compassionate and credible, showing it can manage public finances responsibly while tackling inequality head-on. Equally important is rebuilding trust within Labour's own ranks. Starmer must foster an environment that values diverse opinions and encourages innovation rather than stifling debate through centralisation. Only by embracing a wider range of voices and ideas can Labour rejuvenate its policy platform and reconnect with the grassroots. A more open and dynamic party structure will also boost morale and help present a united front against political opponents. Communication will be key. Starmer's reserved style must evolve to engage voters emotionally. A leader who can connect with people's hopes and fears, speak plainly, and project confidence will stand a far better chance of regaining public support. Media strategy should focus on transparency, accountability, and boldness, rejecting the safe middle ground that has left Labour sidelined. Finally, Starmer must recognise the urgency of the moment. With a general election looming, time is running out to rebuild Labour's credibility and momentum. Failure to act decisively risks handing power once again to the Conservatives or allowing fringe parties to fracture the vote. The next steps taken by Starmer and his team will shape not only their political futures but the direction of the country itself. The choice is clear: adapt, lead and inspire, or continue down a path of decline and division. For the sake of the Labour Party and the nation, Starmer must rise to the challenge and prove he is the leader capable of delivering the change Britain desperately needs. The coming months will test his resolve like never before, and the eyes of the country are watching closely.